welcome everybody to a new episode. And after a long time, I have on Mr. Bryan Boorstein. How are you doing, Bryan?
Yeah, man, doing great. Always a pleasure to chat with you and talk fitness and things.
Yeah, so I think we only had one, like one-on-one talk like this, right? Like the other ones were all with
With
Dave.
Dave. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
Yes.
probably true. Back in like COVID times, maybe like 2021 or something.
Yeah, it was 2021, probably around this time, actually, if I recall correctly, because I remember I was fairly deep into my diet that I did, and it lasted for I don't know, like a good 6 months, and then yeah, we were sort of talking about getting lean and your favorite diet strategies and how you found maintaining a lower body fat and those things, and I know that those topics were very deeply resonating with me at the time. I mean, not like they're irrelevant now. It's just when you're dieting, then you're like
Yeah, you're
super,
in
super.
it.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. So yeah, like maybe actually let's start with that because I think that for you, sort of how you go about your fitness stuff and what things you're prioritizing have changed quite a bit since. And I know you talked about these things on other podcasts as well, but it would be cool to reiterate some of those here. So yeah, like just in a general sense, what are you working on these days in terms of your own fitness?
Yeah, it's a broad question. I like it. So, I've pretty much decided as of the last year and going into this year that I pretty much have two phases to my year now. I have the spring and summer where I focus more on biking or cardiovascular activity, and then I have the fall and winter where I focus more on hypertrophy and kind of like I used to do.
Hmm.
Ultimately, I think that this is probably going to lead to me not making hypertrophy progress, but at some level, I'm kind of okay with that because I think through all the discussions that you and Dave and I have had privately in our WhatsApp group, you guys have now conditioned me to this idea that I'm 26 years into training and I'm 41 years old, and it's probably unlikely that I'm making much progress now anyway. So all of these visions of grandeur that I had, these delusions that I could change this one thing in my training and suddenly I could actually improve body parts and add muscle mass. I think I wouldn't say I've completely accepted that I've reached my limit, but I do think it's close enough and the asymptote is close enough to the bottom that it would be very hard to detect any changes that do occur.
Yeah, I would like to reject the responsibility in that. Like if but I know what you mean. Like we had a lot of discussions and sort of like depending on the phase, I like my mindset around this was and is or has been and is different. So, and I still sort of battle with that. So I want to get into this a little bit. What you just said, like the mindset around your training and sort of how that changes as you become more advanced and more experienced. So there is the Dave McConey type, highly rational. Some people would label it nihilistic. I would call it maybe skeptical
Mhm.
mindset when it comes to this. So obviously that will make you go about things one way versus the other mindset, which would be like, okay, it's like never it's never not never too late, but you never really run out of gains to be making, and it all just matters on how much you optimize things, and you can always grind for more, and it is worth it to invest into these new techniques and little hacks that you can implement in your training, and like that has its own beauty, I think, sort of preserving that mindset, and yeah, like I guess how do you like now if you transition more towards the skeptical mindset, um, was that an easy transition or it came naturally because you found this new passion that you have now for cardio, or how has this been for you?
I think it happened kind of naturally. It was definitely gradual. So all of the conversations that we had, nihilistic really is probably the right word. I feel a bit nihilistic about my own hypertrophy at this point. And it started back in the August of 2022 when I turned 40. I don't know what happened at 40, but like a switch flipped, and suddenly I started caring so much about longevity. It's weird because at 39 and 364 days, I didn't think about this at all. And then at 40, as if there was some drastic change in the universe, I took a trip by myself for my 40th birthday. I just wanted to have some solitude time. So I went up into the mountains. I went hiking. I uh, had a hot tub and just kind of sat in there and looked out at the wilderness. And I don't know why, but I just started feeling this sense of I'm suddenly on the downhill of life, as in like the first 40 years I'm climbing and now I'm descending. And it's
Mm,
not necessarily like I believe that I'm going to die at 80 years old and that 40 is the pinnacle of my life or anything like that. It's more just a different perspective on life in a sense. And I don't want to say it was in that moment that I decided that I don't care about hypertrophy because it was very much gradual. But in that moment, I began to care more about longevity. And so I spent that whole first year of my 40s really focusing on personal self development. Um, I've always had a propensity to mouth breathe at times, and especially at night while I was sleeping, which I later found out like 60% of males across the world pretty much mouth breathe at night and may or may not realize it. So I started mouth taping at night. I started doing cardio. So prior to August of 2022, I mostly just lifted and did steps, and I had convinced myself that that was sufficient. And so I started doing cardio. I started mouth taping. I started probably being a little bit more cognizant of eating more vegetables and, these little subtle things that kind of stack up over time. And
mhm,
so as I began using cardio as a health and longevity tool, I was stimulated by how quickly the adaptations occurred. And it reminded me of what it felt like to achieve quickly in the early days of lifting, the first 5 to 10 years, where everything works no matter what you do. And the idea of being able to progress again, even if it wasn't lifting, that gets biking or whatever it is, just this idea of being able to see tangible progress on a week to week and then month to month basis was so motivating for me that I think my interest switched to cardio, not because I enjoy cardio, because in reality, I still think I enjoy lifting more.
mm,
Um, I just enjoy the progress more than either of those. You know what I mean? Like just the ability
yeah.
to make progress on something. And so I think that was probably the main impetus.
Yeah, and it's who you said a lot of things that I want to react to. So the first thing that I want to ask you about is the epiphany that you had when you turned 40. So was the focus on longevity? Like what was that really driven by? Is it about like a fear of like, I don't know, having a heart attack at some point and dropping dead, or is it more so about like keeping yourself in the best possible shape so that you can be like as functional, or what is it driven by
Yeah,
mainly?
I think it's definitely much more driven by health span than lifespan. I don't foresee myself breaking down and dying of a heart attack or, God forbid, developing cancer or anything like this, anytime soon. I think for me, it's more about doing all of the little things that are needed to make sure that when I'm 80, when I'm 85, when I'm 90, maybe 95, whatever it is, that I can still be functional, that I can still play with my grandkids, I can still lift weights, I can still ride my bike, and I can still do the things that I love that make me happy on a day-to-day basis. And I think if I didn't do those things and begin instilling those building blocks a little bit more at this age, then it just becomes progressively harder and harder to do it as you get older.
Yeah, yeah, it's kind of it's interesting that that is something that is on your mind, like what's gonna be what's it gonna be like when you're 85 or 90. Like I think and I'm not sure how you were like a couple of years ago. Like I don't know if there was something on your mind at all, but for me, it's sort of like it's such a different state of being. Like I can't imagine how it's gonna be like to be 5 years older or 10 years older than what I am now. But like 85, like that's like so many things will be different. Like it's almost like a different person if I think about it. Like it's, but I know it's silly. It's a silly thought. But do you like at least like a couple of years earlier self of yours? Like would that be able to resonate with this?
Yeah, dude, 100%. I mean, like I said, at 39 and one day prior to 40, I was still in that mindset. Like it's so it really is like a switch flipped. And I would say in my 30s, all the way up through my late 30s, I very much lived in the moment. I never had any thoughts of a future that may or may not exist. All there was the moment that I'm in right then. And in many ways, I think that was actually a lack of maturity, because the way I would react to my kids when they would frustrate me or something like that was very driven by that moment. And I would get frustrated and outwardly so. Like they would even my 3-year-old son at the time, who's now 6, but my 3-year-old son would even tell me like, "Dad, why are you always yelling at me?" And literally like those types of things. It was just me in that moment, and that's how I felt. So that's how I reacted. There was really no thought that went into it. And
Yeah.
then now I'm much more calculated and forward thinking about the actions that I have. And I don't want to be perceived as the dad that yells a lot. I want to be perceived as the gentle, caring, thoughtful dad that puts in the time, you know? And
Mhm.
so these sort of things all kind of fall into that same pot of looking into my future and things like that, whether it's health or the way I'm perceived and things like that.
Right, right. Okay, so okay, that's in your case, then it was actually like just this sudden like dividing line where you all of a sudden felt like you had a lot more, I guess, wisdom than before. Because usually these things don't pan out like that. So it's not like, okay, once you turn 30, then all of a sudden like you're an adult. Up until then you're just a kid, and then like at 40, like all of a sudden now you're this wise, like in like middle-aged man or whatever. Like, or is 40 middle-aged, or is that 50? I don't know these
It,
cutoffs.
Yeah, it depends how you perceive it. I guess the way I like to look at it is that you look at the middle age of your adult life. So if you think of adult life starting at 20 because you're basically just a kid and you're developing up until that point,
Yeah.
that if you go from 20 to 80, then 50 would be the middle of
Uh-huh.
your adult life. So that's
Yeah.
the way I tend to look at it.
That makes sense. So, and I'm curious. So, if you didn't find this passion now for cardio, do you think you would have been able to make the transition to a much more like minimalistic lifting setup, and just like do maintenance training, basically? Do you think you would have been able to do that?
Yeah, I had talked about that with you and Dave prior, I think on one of the podcasts we did, maybe on Dave's channel. And I've been tossing around that idea of going to maintenance for my lifting for, God, I gotta say about 2 years at this point. And I think the thing holding me back is really, it's so silly, but that I have this perception online of being this like optimal hypertrophy guy. And I run this program on my app, Bryan's program on Train Heroic,
Mm-hmm.
and that is supposed to be optimal hypertrophy. And so I have this sense of feeling like I'd be letting everybody down if I then go and say, "Hey, I'm just this optimal hypertrophy guy, but I'm just going to do maintenance. But don't worry, I'm still going to keep programming optimal hypertrophy for you." I feel
Yeah.
sort of a responsibility to stay on the cutting edge of science and innovation and continuing to try and sample all of these new things that are coming out, whether it's like lengthened work and partials and training to failure or not training to failure or like whatever the hot topic is in the industry. I want to be not just aware of the science, but I want to actually have that firsthand experience in using it.
Yeah, yeah, it's especially as a content creator, like you have your podcast that you talk on regularly, and yeah, like you're working with clients and whatnot, and it's just you can do all of that while not being as invested in, I guess, maybe in your fitness in general. Like I went through phases like that where, yeah, like I just didn't train as much or as hard, and also with allowed my body fat to come up and whatever. And it's like very very difficult to even have my brain be like regularly operating like around those topics, and just sort of being in the flow of like looking out for new information, then thinking about that information, like, okay, what could I talk about now? It's just very much not coming as naturally, so it's actually very tough. So yeah, like there's definitely that aspect as well. um and then yeah, like from a training motivation standpoint, I guess it's just like that was the whole point, like through all these years, like always having goals and like striving for them, and like that being this motivator, removing that and just like turning basically lifting into a chore, like brushing my teeth, like, okay, like I have to do it, so I'm gonna do it, but like it's kind of a pain in the ass. So like yeah, but so now we have this cardio passion, which is cool. So let's talk about that a bit. So I know we talked about this a million times, but what sort of cardio, for what tool do you use for cardio, first of all?
So my favorite tool is to bike and specifically to bike outdoors. I really do not enjoy the stationary bike inside. And I actually hate it so much that when this winter started and I couldn't bike outside anymore because it was cold, I went and bought a rower, a rowing machine, and I hired a rowing coach and
Ooh.
basically had a guy program me rowing workouts to improve my VO2 max output, specifically using the rower. And I did that for about 8 weeks from November through December in 2023. And then I realized that I kind of hate the rower for the same reasons I hated the stationary bike, which is you're just stuck indoors doing the same motion over and over and over again.
Yeah.
And psychologically, it just beat me down and I didn't want to do it anymore. So, my preferred tool is to bike outside. And that's why I ultimately came to this conclusion that periodizing my year into doing biking when it's nice out and I can get outside, and then doing lifting more in the colder months seems to be a really nice compromise, and it actually keeps me motivated for both parts. So this winter I was very motivated to focus on lifting again and really delve into the content creation culture of that, engaging with Cass and N1 some more. I'm actually going to hypertrophy camp at N1 this coming weekend. So March 16th and 17th, I'll be at hypertrophy camp for 2 days there. And so I'm
Awesome.
really excited about that. And then I'm also really excited about getting back into biking a little bit more seriously starting in April and dialing back the lifting kind of. My plan is to switch to a 2 times a week full body routine,
Mm.
because last year I tried to optimize both. And I don't, this was obviously a naive approach on my part, but I thought, hey, I can train 4 to 5 days a week lifting on, a evidence-based body part split type program. And I can also bike 5 days a week and
Yeah.
continue to make progress there. And eventually, not too long after doing that, I reached a point where I realized that my motivation for both was beginning to suffer, and I
Mm.
wasn't making progress on either one as
Oh.
quickly as I thought that I should. And because I had already gotten through my newbie gains on biking, like no longer was I making these weekly, monthly newbie gains. Like I had to actually put in the time and effort to make gains. And so, probably a little bit too late in the process, back in August of 23, I finally succumbed to the fact that I need to choose one. And so I dialed back lifting to 2 times a week. I continued biking 5 to 6 times a week. And voila, I started making tons of progress on my biking again. And I was able to maintain, for the most part, my strength on my lifting. So that was a necessary change and something that this year I'm taking into from the beginning. So I'm literally just switching to this 2 times a week full body routine from the beginning of April once I start adding biking volume up again. And I think that should be a much more productive result.
Right. So, and then if you're gonna do 2 days a week, then will that also mean that that will be two pretty big session that you will do?
Yeah, so initially I wrote my program based on a podcast that I did on my channel, Eat, Train, Prosper. We did an episode called 10 Exercises for the Rest of Your Life, where you basically just pick your 10 favorite exercises, and those are the only ones that you can do in theory.
Hmm.
So initially I wrote my program choosing 5 of those and putting them on one day, and 5 of them and putting them on the other day. But then as I've kind of ruminated on this and thought about it further, I've realized that those 10 exercises, like why am I trying to put myself in a bucket and say I can only do these 10 exercises? Because I feel like there is value in some things that are outside of those 10 exercises as well. Especially because I'm doing biking, that instigates the need for potentially some additional things. Like, for example, a conventional deadlift was not part of my 10 exercises, but it's something that I think can give me a lot of bang for my buck if I'm doing this as part of a 2 times a week full body routine. So I rewrote my 10 exercises for life and I created 12 exercises, and then I switched out 1 or 2 of them. And so now, yeah, I have 6 exercises on one day, 6 exercises on the other day. They're organized in antagonist alternating pairs. And
Hmm.
and I think that it'll probably, when you say a huge session, I don't know what defines like a huge session, but
I mean,
I would
six
say
lifts is not.
60 to 90 minutes across 6 exercises on each day. So I'll be lifting for 2 to 3 hours a week, I guess would be kind of the idea.
Yeah, yeah. So that's and then I don't know if you said that already, but how many sets per
I,
exercise?
I haven't fully decided. I'm gonna guess that it's gonna be somewhere between 2 and 4 working sets, depending on
Uh,
the exercise, depending on how close to failure I go, things like that. But I definitely am going to be taking long rest periods. That's one thing that I don't like to negotiate on too much in my weight training. You know, you see people all the time getting these high volume routines in, but they're having to take 1 to 2 minute rests between sets to be able to fit in all of this volume. And I'd
yeah.
much rather just make sure that like I'm doing biking, so I have my cardiovascular output stuff taken care of. I want lifting to be as separate from that type of stimulus as possible. And so I'm really gonna get 3 to 5 minutes of rest between like movements. So if, for example, if I'm alternating between a leg curl and a chest press, it might go like leg curl, rest 90 seconds, chest press, rest 90 seconds, back to leg curl. So I'm getting
Yeah.
almost 4 minutes of rest before I get back to the leg curl again.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And so then you're going to be doing that now with the cardio. So what metric are you tracking mostly to measure your progress there?
Yeah, so I've been debating getting a power meter for my bike, but they're over $1,000 at this point. And so I haven't pulled the trigger on it yet. So what I've been using primarily is speed or pace. So I have routes that I do, like common loops between 12 and 40 miles that I'll do depending on what type of stimulus I'm going for. And so I'll look at my last time I did this route and I'll try and do it faster at the same heart rate. So those are the two variables I use. I use heart rate and I use speed. And so speed is not a good metric if your heart rate is way higher, right? Like if I did 16.3 miles per hour, but my heart rate is 148 instead of 138, that's a very different workout. And so I
Yeah.
try to create that important connection between heart rate being stable but speed going up. And it's not even like I'm trying to do that on a session to session basis because it's just like lifting. You wouldn't expect to go in every single session and beat your prior session. Like obviously that's what you would want to do, but it's not what you expect to do. And it's the same thing
Yeah.
with biking. Like daily preparedness is going to oscillate. And so I just try to look at the trend over time, making sure that I'm getting faster at same heart rate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right. Cool. And so you do that 5 days a week. You're doing cardio.
That's my plan. Yeah, maybe six even. I the way that it's going to be split up is that of the six sessions, one of them is going to be like zone one or like really low zone two. So my heart rate will be in the 120s the whole time. And so
Mm-hmm.
that's one that I'll probably do on the same day as a weight training session. So I'll do like my weight training in the morning or vice versa, and then do the other one in the afternoon. And I'll be able to fit two sessions in that way. Then I'll have three sessions that are straight up zone two. So I find zone two to be a bit of a middle ground where I don't think it's super fatiguing, but I don't necessarily think that it's like recuperative or
Kind of like
cathartic
walking.
necessarily either. It's kind of neutral.
Right.
And then I will have two much harder bike sessions. So one where I live in the mountains. So one where I go out and I just attack some mountains and I just go like climb hills for 2 hours, which is going to be awful. And I'm going to have to put that as far away from weight training as possible.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'll have one session that's also higher intensity, but maybe not as hilly. It's just really pushing the effort and getting my heart rate up into like zone four, zone five. So those two intense sessions are the big focus of the week as far as biking goes. And then the zone two and the zone one session can kind of just be fit in wherever I feel I can.
Right. And just for those actually including me, so can you quickly define which, like, what each of those means?
Yeah, so zone one would be like in theory, I guess zone one is also what we're doing right now. Like we're talking and our heart rates are very low. I tend to define zone one as something where you're moving, but you're not quite in zone two yet. So it could be like a very fast paced walk.
Uh-huh.
That would probably be like a good way of defining zone one would be like a really fast walk, maybe even like some hills, but nothing super crazy.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, Zone two is the way I like to define, there's a few ways I'll define it, but one of the things I really like recently that I heard is it's the fastest pace that you can do while it still feels easy.
Huh.
Um,
Okay.
and so another metric that I'll use with people is when you're in what you think is zone two, have a 12 to 15 word sentence memorized and then say that sentence. And if you can say that sentence in one breath and without it making you go in any sort of breath deficit, so you don't say the sentence and then you're like like that, like you're able to
Yeah.
say the sentence and then you just kind of go on breathing as you normally would. That
Mm-hmm.
is also a good kind of definition of being in zone two. Um,
Okay.
Other people will say that you can take, 65 to 70% of your max heart rate. It's a very it's actually a broader zone than 65 to 70%, but that can probably get you to like the middle of the zone. And then you'll have a little bit of leeway above it and a little bit of leeway below it. And then
Right.
maximum heart rate can just be calculated by 220 minus your age, or you can go out and do a series of ramp test intervals where you can pretty accurately get to what would be your max heart rate. And then you can be a little more accurate than 220 minus your age.
Right. So then any sort of like truly all out, like what some, I mean, I guess what would be recommended for like high intensity interval training, like that sort of thing, you don't do at all?
So truly all out would be something that's powered by the creatine phosphate system, and it wouldn't even
Hmm.
be anaerobic per se. It would literally be ATP and creatine phosphate. So when you're going all out, you can't really go all out for more than say 10 seconds. And then you would need 2 or 3 minutes to recover before you could go all out for 10 seconds again.
Yeah.
So I would say that as far as what I consider all out or hit would be anything that takes you above 90% of your max heart rate.
Hmm.
So if my max heart rate is about 185, 90% of my max heart rate would be about above 155, something like that.
Hmm.
Or no, above yeah, 155. That's right. So on both of the days where I do hills and the day where I do higher intensity biking, like interval stuff, both of those are going to get my heart rate above 90%. In fact, it's likely that on the day that I do the hills, I probably will hit 100% and maybe even set like a new heart rate max. The hills are just brutal. They're awful. And um, they're my least favorite thing of biking, the thing I'm worst at, and the thing that I need to work at the most.
Yeah, it's actually so sometimes when I'm having combos like this or when I listen to someone talk about this, I go back in my head and just wonder whether I did something wrong when I was doing hit because I found it so like unbearably brutal that like especially on a stationary bike, like holy shit,
Right.
that I wonder if other people just don't, or if I'm not even supposed to push that hard because like I was truly like for 30 seconds, yeah, that was about my limit. Like I truly tried to be all out at least. Like I was actually like pedaling as hard as I could, and often I actually set the resistance quite high so that like it would be easier to sort of maintain the same effort because if it's really easy then like even
Yeah.
mentally you just cannot keep pedaling so fast because you just lose concentration or whatever for a split second and then you're kind of already behind. And I mean man, like it's I don't even know how to describe the level of agony I felt I was in
Yeah.
at the end of those 30 seconds. And like yeah, like
Yeah.
and as the like let's say 2 minutes or I don't know a minute and a half something like that was my cool down period, sometimes just a minute, like when that approached its end, like I felt this like sort of level of anxiety building up that my god, like I need to do another one. And then like I'm listening to these people like talk about this like on podcasts and like yeah, like so I like to go like 1 minute all out, 1 minute like lower intensity, and like that's how I alternate, and I do like I don't know 6 to 10 cycles of that. And we're like listening to the like, what the fuck like I mean
Well,
it's go on.
it's all out, but it's all out for the time period that you're working. So there has to be some inherent pacing involved. If you're going for a minute or even for 30 seconds, you actually like you really can't go all out for more than 10 seconds. So if you're doing 30 seconds, like you would see if you were looking at your power output or your speed or whatever metric you're looking at, you wouldn't be able to maintain the same output in the first 10 seconds that you can that you would decrease it toward the end of the 30 seconds or toward the end of the minute. What these people are doing when they're talking about these 1-to-1 work to rest ratios is they're talking about the hardest they can go while sustaining that pace across multiple intervals. So if you
Mm,
hit 20 miles per hour as an average in interval one, then your 10th interval should also be 20 miles per hour. So you're
uh-huh.
not emptying the tank in the first one.
Right.
It's almost like let's use 3 RIR on every set so that we can make sure we hit the same reps across every set
Right.
instead of let's go to failure and then by the fifth set we're doing 2 reps. You know what I mean?
Right. So then I guess like the all out is not even the right terminology to use. So it's sort of like I do 5 sets of 10 with like 200 pounds, and it's like, so I do 5 sets to failure, like, so it's kind of like it's one or the other.
Yeah, exactly. And you were
Yeah.
approaching your bike rides as if you're going to failure on every set.
Yes, yeah, and I let my performance drop, so my output was not the
Right,
same, but the effort was the same, which was like as hard as I possibly could in
right.
every interval, and poof, yeah, like it was really really brutal. Um, so okay, so and then so this is what you're gonna do in the spring and
Yeah.
summer, but and what do you do now currently?
So currently, I'm actually, for the first time, I went back to a bro split, if you want to call it that, one body part a day type thing.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And so this was something I was really excited about experimenting with this off season. With all of the new science that's come out with frequency seeming to be mostly a product of volume.
Mm-hmm.
And, if you're doing over X amount of sets per week, yes, it would probably make sense to break them up into multiple sessions. But given that I tend to respond better to 10 sets per muscle group per week on average, I felt like, based on the science, that it was worth giving this another shot because it was super productive for me in my early years. And who knows why it was productive? Maybe it was because it was my early years. But there is a bit of romanticizing about, wow, I had so much fun training on this bro split when I was 22 years old. It would be great to go back and do something similar now and see if I can continue to make progress at all, or not expecting similar progress, but just progress in general. And so I wrote myself up a routine that I call the intelligent bro split because it
Yeah, yeah.
had some elements of, on chest day, there was a little bit of delt work, and on shoulder day, like delt day, there was a upper pec press. So you're getting some chest work in there. And then on arm day, I included pull-ups and dips. So on arm day, you're getting a little bit of back work and a little bit of chest work. So there's a little bit of, like, it's not just, hey, I'm only training chest on Monday and there's no other chest the entire week. It's like there's a little bit here and there's a little bit there and there's a little back here and there's a little back there.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was a kind of cool creation, and I had a lot of fun training it this off season, and I actually did make some progress. So
Yeah, and so what's the arrangement then? Like, is it how many days a week, first of all?
initially, the first mesocycle I did it, it was 6 days a week. It
Uh-huh.
was it was chest and lateral delt, one exercise for lateral delts on Monday. It was back and lats on Tuesday. It was quads on Wednesday. It was delts on Thursday. It was arms on Friday, and then it was hamstrings on Saturday, and then I would
Hmm.
rest on Sunday. That worked really well for about the first 5 weeks of my mesocycle. And then I think it was psychologically, I just didn't want to be in the gym 6 days a week. And so
Hmm.
I began combining delt day and arm day into one day. And that's how I actually then wrote it for the second mesocycle that we're in right now. It's now a 5 day a week program, and the delt arm day has just been kind of consolidated into one day. I've eliminated a couple movements. I've created a couple like antagonist circuits so that I can get through it a little faster.
Hmm.
So the delt arm day is definitely the highest volume day, but it's not necessarily any longer than the other days because of the way that things are paired and supersetted and stuff like that.
Right. And have you noticed any sort of like your work capacity or like your performance like in the later sets dropping a lot faster than when you had like more of a hybrid sort of setup? So with this bro setup, have you found that?
Not so much. Like I said, man, I rest so long between sets. So
Mm,
like none of the days except the delt arm day have more than 10 total sets in a day.
right.
And so even if I'm resting 4-ish minutes between sets, I'm still out of the gym in like under an hour for the most
Hmm.
part. And so, yeah, I haven't noticed a ton of drop off. When I used to do bro split back in the day, I do remember it would be around that 12 to 15 set mark for a muscle group where things would really start to feel as if the muscle wasn't doing the work anymore. Like I'd be sitting there doing, my fourth chest exercise or whatever it is, and I'd suddenly be like, "Oh, I just feel this in my front delts, and I don't really feel like my chest is doing anything anymore because it's just like bludgeoned to death."
Yeah.
Um, so I didn't really notice that at all so much in this version of it.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's pretty cool. Um, and so speaking of volume, which I have to touch on in every podcast to some extent. So you mentioned that like 10 sets. I know we talked about it in the past, but like I kind of forgot what was in your case. So I know you sort of did more moderate volumes historically, right? But that 10-ish set mark, that was then your kind of sweet spot that you made some of your best gains on, would you say?
Yeah, I mean, my best gains of all time occurred when I was doing the Max OT training program, which was a bro split from the early 2000s.
Uh-huh.
And that program specifically was 6 to 9 sets per body part per week.
Mm.
And I think I made my best progress then. But the difference then is that every set was taken to failure. So now when I do 10 sets, I would say that I do follow the same kind of progression plan that I have been following for a number of years now, where I
Hmm.
start mesocycles a little bit easier and then I progress intensity across the mesocycle so that by weeks 4, 5, 6, I'm, at failure or beyond failure, depending on the movement. And so it's a little bit different of a approach now where like before I would just go to failure all the time, every set. And when I would deload would be when I would probably, tweak my shoulder or have something happen where I'd be like, oh shit, well, I guess I need to take a week off now. It kind of like life deloaded for me. Now I
Hmm.
deload when I can feel this tangible sense of fatigue accumulating and I begin to lose psychological motivation to train. Those two things kind of combine together in the moment where I'm like, okay, now it's time for me to take a kind of, I call it a reset week. I don't love the term deload week, but a reset week where I kind of back efforts off. And that's really like my vision of hypertrophy is I just think long-term hypertrophy involves taking like 4 steps forward and then 2 steps back and then another 4 steps forward and 2 steps back. And that's kind of just how I envision this hypertrophy game going for the rest of time. I think it's the most productive way to implement it for most people across the board.
Hmm. Um, and so I know that you like implementing some like intensity techniques and even some yeah, like some like stretch based things. Like I don't know if you these days you do any sort of like rest pause with this
Mhm.
intelligent bro split setup. But yeah, it is like how much over the course of your training career, or like let's just take the last couple of years, how much of that did you implement in your training?
Yeah, I mean, a lot. So the way I kind of view training as a general template is that the big hitting movements like your RDLs and your squat patterns, your single leg squats, stuff like that, these movements all begin my mesocycle at 3 or 4 RIR, something like that.
Mm,
But a movement that's a short overload movement, such as a cable row or a lateral raise or something along those lines, that might start at 1 RIR. And so by the time I get to week 2 on one of those short overload movements, I could already be at failure and then progressing into partials and then doing lengthened sets and rest pause sets and drop sets and like all of these crazy things. Whereas for like the RDL and the squat pattern movements, it's a much more prudent, diligent approach of 4 IR, then 3, then 2, then 1, then 0. Then depending on the movement, maybe a rest pause set. Like I would never do a rest pause set on an RDL, but I would probably do one on chest presses and pull-ups and hack squats and things like that. So very movement dependent, but I definitely take a much more methodical approach in a
mm,
slow gradual approach to these big hitting movements. And then the other kind of less fatiguing movements, I get right into the business like super quickly.
right. And so how do you think, which I know you must be getting this question from clients, and like I'm sure you were wondering about this a fair bit, but like at this point, what would you say is the how does the comparison look like with these like let's say a rest pause set or like a myo rep set, something like I don't know, you do 10 reps and then just rest, I don't know, like 15-20 seconds, something like that, and then you do another like 4 and then another 4 and then a 3 or something like that. Like how do you think this compares to resting longer and doing like just normal sets that you would do?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think they're just as effective. I mean, I think you have to do more of them. And that's I think the research would resonate with that as well. So from my experience and from the research, they kind of seem to tell me the same thing, is that you're looking at about 3 straight sets being equivalent to like one top set with 5 drops or 4 drops, depending on kind of how you look at that. So
Hmm.
or 4 myo rep sets. So basically you're having to do 5 sets instead of 3 sets, but you're doing
Hmm.
them with these much shorter rest periods in between. Whereas when you're doing the straight sets, you're having to do like a full 2 to 3 4 minute rest, whatever it is.
Right.
So I found that to be pretty accurate. The way that I usually go about implementing them for myself, though, is that I usually do 2 top sets. So the first one's a straight set to failure, and then the second one is a straight set followed by either like drop set, rest pause set, myo rep type thing. And
Mm.
I'll progress the number of myo rep or rest pause sets that I do week to week. So like, week 2 of the program might just be 2 straight sets. And then week 3 is 2 straight sets with a rest pause. And then week 4 would be 2 straight sets with 2 rest pause sets. And then week 5 would be 2 straight sets with 3 rest pause sets. And so I'm kind of progressing volume in that way, but not necessarily the same way that RP used to do it, where they'd be adding like a full set in there. I feel like adding a myo rep set with a 15-second rest is not nearly as fatiguing, but
Mm.
potentially quite as stimulating as doing that full set additionally.
Right. And how do you like, what is your preferred way of implementing a rest pause like mini set? So do you do like just count your breaths that you're taking, or you're measuring it with something, and like how much rest do you usually like to allow yourself?
Yeah, it depends on the movement, right? So more isolation movements, short overload type movements, I find that 20 to 30 seconds is usually a pretty sweet spot for myo rep sets. I know that's a
Hmm.
little longer than what a lot of people
That's like,
take, but I always tend to rest a little more on the longer
hmm.
side. Um, for compound movements, I try to do 20 to 30 seconds, but it always ends up being 30 to 40. And it's because I do my 20 to 30 seconds of like walking around and, counting in my head, breathing, whatever it is, looking at my watch. But when I get ready to set up for the movement, I always take like an extra 5 or 10 seconds to actually like address the bar and lift the weight. Whereas on
Yeah.
isolation movements, I kind of just pick it up and go. And so that ends up being like a little bit like an extra 5 to 10 seconds that I take for those like heavier hitting movements.
Right. Um, and how do you observe your like work capacity to be on those mini sets? So, like me as an example, it's sometimes actually kind of shockingly poor. Like, so I don't know if I did like 10 reps, let's say on the top set, then and I take like let's say 10 something between 10 and 15 deep breaths. So I think that should get me to like 20, 30 seconds. Um, like I will do like sometimes just like 3 reps after that, and
Mhm.
that's like already pretty much like an all out, and then 2. Like so,
Yeah.
it sometimes it's that bad. What is your usual?
Yeah, that's pretty typical to me as well. I usually do my top buy-in set at between 7 and 10 reps. And then I'll
Mm.
be lucky to get 3 if it was a 7 rep set. If
Mm.
it's a 10 rep set, then yeah, I'm likely to get 3, maybe 4, but usually 3. And then to your point, yeah, on the second one, I won't get 3 again. I would drop a rep. So it'd either be like from 4 to 3 or from 3 to 2. But I have noticed, like working with clients, and I'm sure you have too, that this varies tremendously, right?
Oh
Like
yeah, yeah.
I have clients that will do a rest pause and get 1 rep. And I'm just literally like, are you serious? Like, can you send me a video, And then I have people that they'll do a 10 rep buy in set and get 6. And I'm also, again, like, can you send me a video? Like, are you resting too long? Like, what's going
Yeah,
on here? So I expect of a 10 rep set, I expect 3 to 4. That would be kind of my expectation. And then, of course, there's outliers on either side.
yeah, yeah. I would actually love to just test this with some people that are just like famously or knowingly respond really well to lower or higher volumes. So like I would love to see what Jeffrey Verity Schofield gets, for example, on a similar setup as what I have. So like
Uh-huh.
if if I do like a heavy set of 8, or heavy set of 8, like an intense set of 8, so close to failure, like what, like I don't know, 3, yeah, like 3 reps would be pretty typical for me in that case to get afterwards. But like, would he get 4 and then like 3 other 4 rep mini sets afterwards? Like, I would not be shocked if he did, because like he's just so seems to be gravitating towards higher volume so naturally. So I don't know if that is something like your preference to higher or lower volumes, and then your kind of just genetic makeup in terms
Right.
of like what your muscles respond best to, how strongly those things really correlate. I think they correlate in practice, but yeah, like it kind of seems like I think our preferences in terms of training volume, like yours and mine, are sort of similar. And it seems like then this is also similar. So that like
Mhm.
not a huge piece of evidence, but it sort of confirms that theory.
Yep.
So yeah, and like just one final thing on the rest pause thing. Like, do you think that this equation or whatever. So like, yeah, roughly like 5 sets would be the equivalent of 3 normal sets. Do you think that that has to do with like, I don't know, like the reps being roughly equated in that case, like just sheer number of reps, and I guess because of that, like tonnage as well that you perform?
I actually tend to equate it more to effective reps. And I know there's been a lot of hoorah in the industry
Yeah,
recently around effective reps and all of that. But when you actually look at the number of effective reps that you would get doing three straight sets where you're, guaranteed to get in theory 15 effective reps if each of those sets is to failure.
yeah,
Um, if you did one set to failure and then you did four rest pause sets, it would be around the same. It might be slightly more actually effective reps doing the rest pause, but I do think that you just lose out a little bit of stimulus because to think that only the last five reps are effective, I think is naive thinking, right? Or improper in some way. And so I think
yeah,
that in the straight sets, you are getting some credit for those reps prior to the final five. So I think that's why maybe you'll see 17, 18 effective reps in the rest pause model, and you'll see 15 effective reps if you're only using the last five.
yeah.
So that to me, that explains it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. I guess that would make sense. Yeah, it's because honestly, lately I've been kind of tempted to give that a go. Like just do pure rest pause on basically everything except like if something is actually dangerous or something. Because like yeah, it's especially I like to go to a gym and actually be there. Like I could train basically my whole upper body at home, but I feel like I just need to leave the house a bit more often, honestly. So, but like at the same time, I go there, but to be honest, like the main reason is just the walk that I'm that I'm taking to the gym. Like that's half the reason why I'm even going there. But then once I'm there, I just really don't like to stay there for too long. Like, and like there are so many dickheads in these gyms. Like it's I'm so sick of it, honestly. So yeah, like it would be cool if I could be done with something that would otherwise take an hour in, I don't know, 15 minutes. Like that would actually be very appealing. Have you ever tried like doing something like that, like pure rest pause training, or like purely these intensity techniques, or that was always just a sprinkling on top?
Yeah, no, I haven't done that exactly. I did go through a period of time in my earlier years where I did an entire routine where everything was pre-exhaust. So it'd
Mm-hmm.
be like a same muscle group superset, like leg extension to leg press or hack squat or whatever, cable chest fly to push ups, things like that. And
Oh,
so
bless you.
every every set was a pre-exhaust superset, and I would only need to do like three of those, three sets of like cable fly to push up, do that three times, and my chest would be blasted. And so if I had a day that was chest and back, I'd be out of there in 30 to 40 minutes just hitting those kind of three or whatever sets of same muscle group superset back to back, each one to failure.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha. So just last couple of questions to you. So, what is your this is your training setup, the intelligence bro split. Do you but you still do some cardio, I'm assuming?
Yeah, yeah. So I've been doing, I would say, 2 to 3 times a week cardio over the course of the winter, and it feels much more of something like a task, like a chore, something I have to do, because the lifting is the priority. And so that's the idea, I guess, in trying to decide which is your priority is, putting the other one on the back burner. And so cardio in this season has definitely been harder for me, partially because of the weather, because I can't get out on my bike as often. But what I have been trying to do is we do have they call it the Colorado whiplash, but we'll have days where it's 20 degrees and snowing, and then the next day could be 60 and sunny, and
Mm,
have like three of those days in a row, and then it could be 20 and snow again. And so I do try to take advantage of the warm days when I can and get outside, but I've been having to do more inside, like rowing workouts and stuff like that in my basement more than I want to do, and I just don't find that motivating.
right. And do you still maintain a pretty high step count, or how is it like?
Yeah, yeah. Surprisingly, I've actually had like my phone, it tells me this year you're walking more steps than last year or whatever.
Mm,
And so it told me that we're in March right now. And apparently I'm averaging 11,000 steps a day this year, which is 500 more than I averaged last year at this time. So,
that's very cool.
yeah, so 11,000 steps a day is my average. There's definitely days where I get 6,000 where I'm just, it's snowing outside and I don't really leave the house and I just kind of play with the kids and get my steps that way. And then there's days where it's beautiful out and I don't feel like doing structured cardio. So I go for 4 walks throughout the day. Like this is actually one of the ways I like to organize my work day is I work on my computer for 60 to 90 minutes and then I'll go walk for 20 to 30 and then I'll come work again for another 60 and walk for 20. And I just kind of do that consistently throughout the day. And I really love how it breaks my day up.
Oh,
And so, yeah, some days I'll end up with 16, 17,000 steps and I don't really even have to think about it. It just kind of happens.
that's pretty cool. And so then that's how you get in the majority of your steps, or I mean, or that's how you get over like what you would have just by going to the toilet and doing things like that is going for these like walks like outside.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And then my wife works from home too. And so we've been trying to make a concerted effort to, on days where our schedules align, to try and take a walk together each day so that we can have a little bit of bonding time as well.
Right, right. Um, and what was I gonna ask? Yeah, so what would you recommend for someone like, I'm guessing a lot of people that are gonna be listening to this, but also myself. So lifting is still the priority, but probably I should do some cardio. Like my VO2 max must be, yeah, like there's something really abysmal. Like I'm even sort of scared of finding it out. So yeah, like I should definitely do something. And at the same time, I don't particularly enjoy it. I don't really have the chance to go on like these big epic bike rides, even when the weather is super good. Like it would be tricky. Like it's just not that sort of an area where I'm living. So what would you recommend? Like, what do you think is like a good, I guess, like minimum effective dose sort of setup for
Mhm.
someone like that?
I think the minimum effective dose has you do at least one high intensity session each week,
Hmm.
because that's really the thing that's going to move the needle on VO2 max more than like zone two type work will.
Hmm.
So zone two type work is going to increase mitochondrial function and just kind of make you more like insulin sensitive and um, generally increase the ability of your body to do the things that it needs to do with like triglycerides and glucose and cardiovascular health and stuff like that. The high intensity interval stuff is going to go further to increase your VO2 max. And so I don't think that you should do the high intensity interval stuff the way that you described earlier, where every interval is like to failure.
Yeah.
I think that instead, what you want to do is try to accumulate between 15 and 25 minutes of time in zone. So that would be time where your heart rate is at 90% or above.
Mm-hmm.
And so the way that you can accumulate 15 to 25 minutes of time doing that can vary dramatically. Like the most popular way is called the Norwegian 4x4. And so you basically do 4 intervals of 4 minutes each with a 4 minute rest in between. And each 4 minute interval is the hardest pace that you can go that you can sustain for 4 minutes.
Uh-huh.
Um, and so by that point, you've gotten 16 minutes at least of time in zone. And so you're right in that range of 15 to 25. Um, so I think that that one's probably the simplest, most effective, time efficient way to go ahead and do it. But you could also do like 30 seconds on, 30 seconds off for 30 sets. And if you
Yeah.
did that, that would be, 30 minutes and you wouldn't be in zone per se the whole time, but it's like during your 30 seconds off, your heart rate is still elevated during that time. And so you
Mm.
probably end up getting more time in zone than just the 30 seconds that you're working. Um, so 30-30 for 30 minutes works pretty well. You can do, 3 minutes on, 3 minutes off for
Yeah.
6 rounds or whatever. I mean, there's a number of ways you can skin the cat there, but I do think just targeting that time in zone with whatever protocol you want in that 90% ish of max heart rate is probably the way to go.
And just for reference, like 90% of your max heart rate, like that. Um, how does that feel? Like just so I know how it's like to be brutally out of breath, but didn't look at my heart rate so much while I was doing it. So, in turn, like, would you be
Yeah.
able to talk at all when you're doing that?
You'd be able to talk by panting, but you really wouldn't want to talk. You would have a high desire not to talk.
Uh huh.
You wouldn't be able to focus on a podcast or anything. Like you could have a song or a podcast in the background and you would finish your 4 minutes and be completely unaware of anything that was said during that 4 minutes. But at the
Yeah.
same time, it's not like you're in a death march of like I'm going to die at the end of this interval. It's like, hey, this is hard and this sucks, but you can sustain this for 4 minutes, you know?
Yeah. 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 Like the mine ones were death marches for sure.
So I
Like.
think if you took 90% of that effort that you were doing in your 30-second death marches that you would probably be able to sustain that 85 or 90% of that, whatever that power output was that you were doing at that time.
Right. Do you think an elliptical can get you to that level of heart rate?
I've never used an elliptical in that manner.
Uh,
I think elliptical is fantastic for zone two.
yeah.
I think it'd be a really great tool for that because it's very consistent and methodical, right?
Hmm.
I don't know that you can do that safely on an elliptical because you would have to
Yeah.
be going so fast that I feel like it would throw off your rhythm and you could slide out. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, could be because that's by far my favorite cardio machine.
Yeah.
I mean, I like treadmill walking as well, but that's not like that's pretty chill. And yeah, okay, so I will try to give that a go, and I will report in how it went.
Yeah. And then I
Um,
would also say that you probably want to do at least one zone two session a week. So, like a bare minimum dose would be one zone two session and one interval session. And I think that that could, at least keep you from backsliding in your cardiovascular health. Um, for sure. And then the more zone two sessions you can add on top of that, the better. Polarized training, which is kind of the coined term to describe how you should train for health and athletic performance, says that you want to do four zone two workouts for every one interval workout over the course of a week. So 80-20 is the rule. 80% of your time in zone two, 20% of your time doing intervals and harder stuff.
mhm.
Um, so, if in theory you end up getting up to 3 or 4 zone two sessions and one interval session, that's still the right ratio.
Yeah,
But if you're not going to be doing as much zone two, I think it's important to at least get that interval session in.
right. And then zone two would be something. So for that, the elliptical could be good, and
Incline walking could work too.
oh, okay. So with
But
that one,
yeah,
that's the one where I can talk. It's just in one breath still.
12 to 15 word sentence that you can say without going into a breathing deficit
Oh,
afterwards.
uh-huh. And like basically time wise, the more the better. But
Yeah,
obviously
I would
like
say 45 minutes as a minimum.
uh-huh. Okay. Like and it's important that it's in one session or
It
cumulatively.
is. Yeah, it is pretty important because it takes your
Right.
body a little while to register that you're doing something. So even if you're doing 45 minutes of it, your body might actually only be in zone two for 35 minutes of it. So if
Right.
you then have to do that twice, then you're wasting 10 minutes on the front end of both of those sessions.
Right. Yeah, like they should invent what exists in video games for us people as well, and can skip animation and like
Yeah.
starting the cardio session, and now I'm skipping the animation.
Yeah.
Um, all right, so then that's pretty cool. That could be a new beginning for me. Like I mean, honestly, like negotiating with myself for the past well, at least 3 years, but no, more so 4 at this point. Like basically every week, I'm planning on starting cardio for the past 4 years. So
That's a long time.
that's a pretty long time. Yeah, like if you people think you're procrastinating on something, check this. So. All right, man. So I think we shared a lot of cool info with the audience. So thanks so much for coming on, and yeah, just please let people know where they can find your stuff.
Yeah, of course, man. Bryan Boorstein on Instagram. Eat, Train, Prosper is my podcast. And then I run a couple group programs where we have subscription training programs. My company, Paragon Training Methods, is where I host Bryan's program, which is kind of what I'm doing. And then there's 14 other programs on that app that you can choose from. And yeah, so check that out. And any questions, hit me up on Instagram or whatever. But thanks for having me on, dude. It's always a pleasure.